Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, you look phenomenal today. You see what happens when you subscribe? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. On this episode, we talked to the one and only Scott Sullivan. He is a compliance officer who has had a really cool approach to building his program. He has so many great tenets, so many great takeaways. I think you're really going to enjoy it.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, Scott.
How are you?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. How's the recovery?
You know, it's going okay. I'm kind of in this phase now where it's just kind of the long road of PT, it's all good though. Every day I feel like I'm getting a little bit more mobility, getting a little stronger. So that's good.
Right. And do they expect any long-term, inability to do certain things, or it's just a time issue?
Yeah. I mean, what they said is as long as I, am diligent with the PT, I'll be good to go.
Good. Great.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
Yeah. So good to have you on, man. How's it going?
Good. Going good. I just got back from a visit of my daughter at Texas Tech, so I'm hoping I don't have measles. Vaccinated, but now there's a news story like people that were vaccinated are getting it. It's like 97.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Measles is coming back. Can you imagine?
Yeah, there's an outbreak in Lubbock and then spread to New Mexico, and first death the other day, actually.
Really?
Oh.
I had no idea. All right. Well,
I guess younger people aren't getting vaccinated, so it's just like, oh my God. So
that's crazy. You thought that was you think that that's totally eradicated,
Yeah, it was pretty close.
So, been excited to get you on the Ethics Experts. I think you have an interesting story. You do a lot of interesting things. Your title itself, I think, is interesting. So I'd love to just kind of dive in. How did you get into the ethics and compliance space or the integrity space?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was really always something I wanted to do. So some people don't know what they want to do until they're through college, or, it's sort of a very non-linear route. So for me, it was very linear. So I always wanted to do something international and something regulatory in nature. I was a political science and Spanish major and then a human geography minor. So sort of always had interest in history and, the international stuff. And I traveled a lot when I was younger, fortunate to do that for school for the most part. So I kind of had that bug. That really sort of positioned me well with a liberal arts degree to be a well-rounded advisor. So that's one of the big things I've always found. It's, you want to sort of be a jack of all, not necessarily a master of none. You become a master over time. But in being a successful chief compliance officer, it's really something around the well-rounded advisor where you bring to the table judgment, gravitas, experience, those types of things.
Yeah, it does take like a very diverse group of skills to be really good at this job.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. That's certainly now.
Yeah, right. Maybe now more than ever. So you first started doing some regulatory work, and how did that scratch your itch? How was that relative to what you hoped it would be, and what was lacking from it?
So always wanted to do that. So went to law school, and then I was at a law firm, and then so dating me a little bit. So it was the .com bust. And so work had slowed down quite a bit, and myself and two other associates at the firm, we put together a pitch or a business plan for the firm to develop sort of a foreign trade practice. And so my entree into the compliance arena was through global trade. So you think export controls, sanctions, and import compliance. And they were important back then, but have taken on sort of a absolute league of its own these days on things. So that was really my entree in. And then from there, I was recruited to go to a company around the corner after a year or two of doing that. So really, that was the entree in, was sort of more the hard compliance stuff and less so with the soft ethics integrity piece.
So what drove you and your friend or your partner to put that business plan together? What was the gap you were seeing in real time that you were like, man, we should do something here?
Yeah, so I think the combination of the three of us, one guy was a second career lawyer, so had a long experience in the oil and gas arena. There were bits and pieces of news stories. It was mostly Washington, D.C. based practice. You would get a couple New York, a couple California, a couple Florida. And so a few very small boutiques in Texas where I was. So, you're a large Texas firm. Why don't we have a practice? And we have a so booming industry in state. So it was really starting to put together that, trying to match the supply and the demand, I guess, or the need.
So what did you learn during that year? It sounds like you did that plan. You kind of built that practice, I guess, for like a year, and then you said that you kind of went around the corner and went in house. Like what occurred in that year that really allowed you to hit the ground running as you made your entree into this hard compliance stuff in house?
Yeah, so I think, experience for sure. So a number of examples of cases and things that were happening, and I just love the when I got the opportunity to go in house, it was unsolicited, so it was on partnership track. It's a little hard to get off partnership track when you're like, wow, you're really close, but it was such a great opportunity. And I think the difference was running something cradle to grave, so you own it. So, when you're an outside lawyer, you sort of worry about malpractice and then where is your next meal going to come from? And when you're in-house, you're like, oh my God, the email I just sent out went out to 10,000 people and everybody's going to be calling me and blaming me when the outside lawyer who might have helped you draft that has gone home for the night. So very different views and perspectives. And I think what I really, really loved of migrating in-house was the ability to build a top-notch team. And that's for my career and my 25 plus years now, that I hope is my legacy at the end of the day, because putting those as a sort of a jack of all, master of none, you have to put all those complementary pieces together to build that top performing team that serves the interests of the organization over time. And those interests obviously go up and down, they go left and right, et cetera. So
did you find building a team hard?
So it can be challenging. Sometimes there's institutional challenges, inability to hire people or things like that. But I love it. It's the thing that I would not take another job without having the ability to lead a team. And, one of my mantras is you build a team so strong, you don't know who the leader is. And so you're building your successors in, you're developing people. And I just in the final phases of getting certified from Berkeley for an executive coaching program. And I might do that sometime later in my career as an aside, but really it was more to improve my leadership skills, right? And sort of building those teams and putting those complementary pieces together and meeting people where they are in life and et cetera. And, one of the stories I always tell is one of the best compliance professionals I ever worked with was somebody that didn't even have a college degree. So you put these very diverse group of people from around the world together, different skill sets, practical experience, in the trenches, rolling up your sleeves, et cetera. And sometimes you get the PhD, but it is a very diverse mix of professionals and skill sets to build that really successful team. And really the test of time is, do people stay? Do people, some people will go for opportunities, but do they stay? Are they loyal? Are they comfortable in what they're doing? Do they feel like they're being developed and they're being valued?
I love that. I love that anecdote you just brought up of the best compliance officer you ever worked with didn't even have a college degree. I've talked to a lot of folks who are kind of like you, and they say, we need to have a diverse group. I need someone that's great at, influence or marketing. I need somebody that's great at comms, maybe somebody that's great at data analytics, right? You got to kind of assemble this Avengers team or something. Mm-hmm. But there seems to be a disconnect between, practitioners like you that have that kind of a view and like organizations at large who kind of don't know what they want. I've heard, I heard a story this week of somebody who didn't have a law degree, who went for this job, didn't end up getting the job because they wanted somebody with a law degree. And then 7 months later, they came back to her and said, hey, this person's not really working out. We'd love for you to reconsider it. So that's just kind of a glimpse of this dynamic where perhaps practitioners have a vision for what their program should look like that is sometimes in conflict with the misunderstanding that the company or the executives might have. Have you ever encountered that? And what advice would you give to somebody who's kind of dealing with that, where they're like, I have a vision for this, I know what I need, and it's just, there's an incongruence or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's inertia from days past where the overwhelming majority of compliance officers were lawyers. There's also sort of sometimes there's a predilection to, we got to have an ex-DOJ and ex-prosecutor. There's a value to that in certain cases. But what I found in my career, oftentimes in that line, as an example, is they often know what is non-compliance. It's very different to say this is compliance. This is how you build, you build a global program, you build culture. Non-compliance hopefully is less than 0.5% of the time. So 99% plus, you're building an organization, enterprise mindset, how to operate around the environment, how to operationalize everything you do. So I think that too is another fault line that's changing over time. And there are circumstances where you probably do want a lawyer, and there are many, many circumstances where it's absolutely unnecessary. So I think it's understanding where the entity that you're going into is, what they're looking to do going forward, and then trying to match those two. I mean, sometimes it might be, as you're interviewing, for example, it might be a sales pitch, and it might be challenging sort of the perception of the status quo and asking those questions up front, because you don't want to get to the final rounds. You're not a lawyer and somehow you're thrown in there. But if you can make the pitch for why a lawyer is not necessary, in the role, then absolutely. And I've seen some of the best compliance officers that are not lawyers. I've seen some lawyers that are great. I often say it's sort of one of the nicest compliments I ever got years and years ago from a friend in the telecom industry was, "You're the most unlawyerly lawyer I've ever met." So one could take that a few different ways, but it really is, how do you present yourself? And if you're in a sort of a blue collar industrial setting and you show up in a Wall Street suit, that's probably not going to go over too well. So rolling up your sleeves, jumping in the trenches, building a common experience with those individuals, and demonstrating you can interact with the board as much as you can with the executives, the average employee, the frontline worker. So really having that sort of, again, I would call it gravitas, and followership is another one. Will people follow you, and how do you convince them to move along the curve? And another phrase I had from a friend in Washington years ago was, you don't have to kill the company to save it. So how you present yourself, a lot of times the non-lawyer compliance officers come from a business function, finance or something, where they have a much better understanding of the business angle and the pressures that someone faces, and where we know lawyers sometimes can get on the high horse or the moral soapbox, and they don't understand how to interact and how to operate in a real operational environment.
You feel like your openness to sort of non-traditional, people in these roles has changed? Like, has it gotten more open over time? Or do you feel like when you started to come in house and this was a cradle to grave situation, you already had some of this sort of forward thinking in mind to say, I need a diverse group, and it's not just the degree, it's how they're actually going to be able to interact with the business and so forth?
Yeah, I think I had it. I mean, certainly developed it more over time. Maybe it's more like it was more reaffirmed over time.
Yeah.
And, two things that strike me, again, when I started out in the practice of law, at the old law firms, there was often there was a lawyer lounge and an everybody else lounge, where people would eat. And I used to go as a first year associate. I used to go down to where everybody eats. And it was like, oh my God, what are you doing? Well, at the time, you need the word processing department to help you. You need the administrative assistant to help you. You need the IT folks. So it was this team that put together that was real important. And the same thing when I started out in-house. At the time, there had been a major regulatory shift in the law. So basically went from none of your items were controlled for export, or a very small percentage, to almost all of them were, or a very significant percentage. And so you didn't have the ability. I mean, all lawyers like to micromanage, right? And so learn pretty quick. You have to build a team that you trust, and then you have to let them free to do the things they need to do. Now, you provide oversight and balance and all those kinds of things. You can't abdicate your role as a compliance officer and say, hey, I'll never check in or never do this. But guiding those folks and sort of building that really, really cross-functional, multi-skill, multilingual team is something I've just seen. It really allows a compliance team to leap forward, I think.
You've said a couple of some of my favorite words. You said sales pitch, you said persuade, I think you said maybe influence. I think so much of our job is being able to do that because we're sort of in this weird sort of middle place. We're like the fascia of the body or something, you know what I mean? And we have to be able to convince up, we have to be able to convince across, and we have to be able to convince down, right? We have to activate those people. Have you always been kind of a persuasive person that sort of like sees a little bit more of the battlefield? You seem like that kind of that like it seems like you have that kind of a vantage point.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I do. I mean, certainly successes and failures over time, and you learn more from the failures than you do of the successes. I do think there's a critical distinction between selling your program and justifying your program. So if you migrate from sell to justify, that's where you sort of have to worry that the organization doesn't really necessarily believe in the program anymore or the direction the program's going. So, but the sales pitch, I think, is really, really important. It's the value add. It's why are you here? And so things like, again, getting in the trenches with somebody, building relationships. And I always say relationships should be a 411 relationship, not a 911. So if you remember, at least when I was a kid, you used to dial the phone, you get the weather and the time, et cetera. And so if people go in, I need this relationship, and I go 911, and the person, who is this compliance guy? All he's ever done is say no to me. That's not going to end well. So really investing in building relationships and taking the time. And I also think, compliance professionals can do things that disarm and sort of some self-deprecating humor. So one of my favorite things to do as a compliance officer is doing the onboarding presentation. You get everybody bright-eyed and bushy-tailed first step into the organization. Right. And I could just go through quickly the little spiel, but it's hey, compliance is different at this organization than you might have experienced otherwise. And I have a picture of a horse that won the Grand National back in like 2008, 2009, and the name of the horse was Comply or Die. And then you go, hey, we're serious, but we're not talking about that. And so it's a little bit of humor. And then people are usually multitasking. They say, what's this person saying? And then I start for me, I'm a lawyer, so I start the lawyer jokes, get those out of the way. And then I have the laundry list of compliance names: Business Prevention Department, Anti-Fund Police, Dr. No, the Grim Reaper, Dr. Doom and Gloom, all the things that you go by and you say, we really want to be a business partner. But everybody in the business knows that, hi, I'm Scott, I'm here from corporate, I'm here to help. That usually means you drop all kinds of stuff and, oh my God, we're going to have 800 things. And then I'll also go and I put a little picture of Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. And I'll say something like, please don't treat me like Moses and the parting of the Red Sea, where you're in the office, you see me, you're diving over a cubicle, turning around, running away, hiding, doing this when you're walking by. And then I literally will do, like 10 fingers. I have 10 fingers, 10 toes, my heart beats, I have children and pets, because it is humanizing that function. And if you can get to a position where they view you as a trusted colleague, and that when you say no, it's an integrity no, it's not a CYA no. Right. So, if he really says no, he must mean it, and he's looking out for me instead of no, 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 no. I mean, you try to look for a yes, doing it in the right way, an ethical way, a compliant way, et cetera. So I think it's really is the way to influence and persuasion is to build that shared experience, the camaraderie. You build up the credits in the bank for the rainy day when you really need to say the no. Right. But if you're constantly known as no, 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 that's
they're going to be doing that. They're going to be hiding. They'll be diving over the cubes.
Absolutely.
So what you talked about is what I really push people to do all the time, because you really do have, you said it's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you have that room of people. You really have this little window when someone has, like, if you want to change a habit, the best time to do it is when there's like a major life event. You want to quit smoking, do it when you have your first kid, or, you want to start going to the gym, do it when you move, right? It's like your mind and your body, your being is open to change, or, you're more open when there's a major change, and starting a new job is one of those major life events. And so someone comes into this major life event with kind of a lot of hope. They haven't been jaded. Maybe they left a place that they were jaded. So you have this little window that you can really have a lot of impact. And I love the whole, I'm so glad you shared that kind of talk track, because it just underscored so many critical elements, and you kind of said them. One is humanizing. One is getting in there, like I said, early. One is that pattern interrupt, which is one of the most powerful persuasion mechanisms, right? I expect you to be, a jerk. I expect you to be the office of no, and you're coming and you're showing that you're totally different. You're being funny, you're being human, all those kinds of things. That's a massive pattern interrupt. And something else you did in that, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, is you do this thing called the accusation audit. This is a Chris Voss thing. And you're saying the accusation audit, for those who haven't read my favorite book, Never Split the Difference, is kind of like at the end of 8 Mile when Eminem is up there and he basically says everything that the guy is going to say about him. So when you get all that stuff out, you get that elephant in the room out, it shows, it's just such a trust building thing. It's such an inauthentic thing. And it covers the things that might be in the subconscious. It might be, it might be addressing some of the sort of latent resistance that these new folks are bringing from their last organization. I'd love to hear, how have you seen, maybe you've done that always just based on your instincts. You seem like somebody that has really good instincts. But as you've started to do it, what feedback have you gotten, and how have you seen, what has kept you doing it? Because I'm sure you've changed it. Maybe you've changed some of the pictures and stuff, but that's always a function of feeling like, okay, I got something here. I just need to make it better.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's evolved over time. You get a little crisp. When you can find compliance humor, it's hard to find, so it's great. So you try to latch onto that as much as you can. I think humility is another real big one. So I have my oldest daughter was a fantastic volleyball player, and I always used to tell her, again, as kids, that stuff can go to their head, and so I used to tell her, confident yet humble and gracious. And when after she graduated from high school, the rave was tattoos, and wanted tattoos. I've tried, no, please, no tattoos. So the first one she did was my father, who passed away over a decade ago. She got his signature on her wrist, right? So that was number one. Number two was the confident yet humble and gracious. So she really persuaded and played.
She really internalized that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. And so I think that humility piece is really, really important. I don't know all the answers. I'm a human being too. I will work with you. I'm not going to work against you, all those kinds of things. So trying to build that relationship, again, that 4-1-1 relationship, so that they see you really are there to help. There might be a time you say a no, but if it is, you get street cred, right? So it's not just saying no because you're the compliance guy. There really, really is a reason to do that. And I think the other thing, to your point of sort of the pattern interrupt, it's when you could find things that really get people to the multitask to wow is something that is they're engaged, is
right.
That says you've got it, right. And another one I've done is with Richard Bistrong. I've done a couple of videos in both of my organizations that I've been at where it's been like a fireside chat, and you sit down and a convicted felon, you're walking through, and it's not all these crazy stories, but it's the slow way that things can happen. And so it was really one of those things that for people is wow, this could happen to me. So bringing to the table things that are relevant, things that really can impact and save them from getting into a situation. Because look, you may be 1% bad apples, and you want to prevent them from getting into your organization. If they get in, sneak in through the door, get them out as quickly as you can. But the other 99%, or maybe it's 90, because there's some people that will never do anything bad, a small percentage on the other end. But the 98% of the folks, it's anybody in a particular situation on a bad day, a personal issue, something going on, somebody could make that mistake. And how do you provide a mechanism for them to correct that, or to come forward, or to raise the issue where they're not, fearing they're going to get slammed down?
That storytelling is very powerful. But again, it's, it seems like you're playing a bunch of different notes. You know what I'm saying? You're doing a bunch of different things. Not just, I'm just releasing training once a year, and everybody knows what compliance is. It seems like you're taking a really active role in crafting that brand and crafting that impression throughout the organization. Why do you think that's hard for folks? What do you think it is? I don't know. Sometimes it's you don't want to stretch before the run, but if you don't warm up, it's a crappy run. It's you got to do that pre-work for the real work to actually go well. You got to do that planning, whatever. And I just find why is this brand not changing? Why is the office of no? Why are we still talking about the office of no? This is not 1997 anymore. You know what I'm saying? Compliance has been around for a long time, 20 years, whatever. It's very clear that we have to drive behaviors. It's very clear to me that like people can't really be compelled to do things. It's all has to be kind of voluntary, which means there has to be a foundation of persuasion. There has to be an influence kind of an angle. And like, we're also all human beings. So we all have relationships outside of work. We all have, natural reciprocity that we engage in with these other folks. And we show up with empathy with, these other relationships that are outside of work. What do you think the disconnect is inside the four walls of an organization that causes a compliance officer to not take those extra smart strategic steps that you've kind of built your career and your programs on to make those deposits in the bank, as you said, prior to the no that's inevitably going to come,
Well, I think a lot of them do. I mean, some folks, and I haven't been successful in that in my whole career too. So there's ups and downs with that. There are other competing priorities. I mean, having executive sponsors who believe in you and believe in the program, huge. And so I've seen many, many organizations where it's just put compliance in a box, put them over here, et cetera. So I think, part of it is structural or organizational. But the other thing is, an organization is made up of hundreds or thousands of individuals. So it also is something that keeps everybody employed because they're human beings. So you could be doing all the right things. And unfortunately, it can be a few bad apples or a few people that turn to the dark side on a particular day that causes real harm. And it's very hard to detect all that stuff. One thing I've always tried in my career the last 10 years and just have not been successful, I really wanted to, and with AI, the promise is there and technology, but it's really can you develop something that's a hotspot identifier in terms of sort of bad actors or bad actions? I mean, there's bits and pieces, audits and sort of trying to do predictive analytics and things, and you also, on the other side, you don't want a scarlet letter that says, Nick or Scott, everybody's going to be, watch out for these two because they're the ones that are going to do it. But right. If you could really determine, is there a team at risk? Is there an individual at risk? Is there a sub-function at risk or something? From an HR perspective, you can then save, salvage, rehabilitate instead of the only option is exit and terminate. So again, flipping because I agree, the Department of No or the function of no or the office of no, but we do have to say no sometimes. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's sort of the age old, 10 attaboy, attagirl statements, then you have one where you say no, all those good things are just flashed out. Oh, they said no to a key deal. And of course, it's like December 31st at 11:30 p.m.
You're right. It's going to make the year. Everyone's going to hit quota or something. Yeah.
And we're not going to, the company's going to collapse. I mean, it's all those calamities that come in. So I think, and it takes time, the other thing. And when you have people coming in and out of an organization at different paces and speeds with different influence and things, it's really hard to keep that going. Because I think the other thing, you could build that fantastic culture, but it can change overnight because we are not great. So one of the things I'm fond of saying on culture and ethics and integrity, in my mind, that's the English history side of the brain. It's more art than science. When you get into compliance, it's more the math and science. It's 1 + 1 + 1 = 2. Most companies get that, right? If you put these resources in, you put these rules and all these things that are out there. But integrity, ethics, culture, hard to measure, intangible. When do you have it? When do you lose it? How far do you go with it? And we're seeing a lot of that now with the pendulum swinging, somewhat violently back and forth both ways in society as a whole. And part of our job, I think, is the old British thing was keep calm and carry on. I think it's probably go back and be calm. Like let's calm down. And there's a mass hysteria that's around now that I think as a compliance function we can provide real value. And I always go back to. From the 1980s, there was this great risk model that the U.S. War College came out with, and it was VUCA. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so, we're in a very unpredictable environment. And sometimes it's unpredictable by day, by hour, by week, month. Right. But, we can provide that stable ship, I think, that as a compliance function, as an ethics and integrity function, we need to have the fortitude to see this through. I mean, when people are coming in, the sky's falling, the world's ending, et cetera. Yeah. Part of our job is that calm, dispassionate, this is not our first rodeo. We can help you navigate this stuff, whether it's the hard compliance like sanctions bouncing around or it's more of like, okay, So it appears that a particular administration is going to take a different tact or approach with FCPA enforcement. What does that really mean? I mean, how does the organization adapt and adjust to that new environment, which may be here for 4 years, which may be here for more, which may be here for less? So I think the value of compliance and the function really should be going up now. And it will be interesting to see, because if your program is built on solely on or predominantly on the fear of enforcement, I think it's very different. You'll see the haves and the have-nots sort of separate. Yep. If it's part of your DNA, if it's second nature to you, it's a value and not an initiative that goes away, we're going to really see some differentiation between organizations.
I literally made that point on our webinar yesterday. If your whole value in the organization is just pain avoidance, just avoiding regulatory issues, right, well, as that pendulum swings, you only have like one dimension of the shape of your value. There's a lot more dimensions available for us, to your point, when we can be preventative, when we can get in there, when we can, share some information that we have access to that somebody else maybe doesn't see, so that you can, rehabilitate someone, like you said, instead of firing them. That's a ton of value. Even just being able to, be that lighthouse in the storm where you can give that dispassionate advice, high value. But to your point, you have to have done the work prior to even have that person come to you, to even look toward your harbor to see if you are the lighthouse there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the 411. If you don't have that existing relationship. Nick, the other one, the pattern interrupt, the other thing I think is really important is finding win-wins. And it takes a lot of work, because they're not always the low-hanging fruit and obvious things there. But if you can do that, where you can get somebody to do something in an ethical and compliant manner, and you can find a win. Sometimes the public ones are few and far between, but if you can find those, you should be, a bullhorn at the top of the mountain,
totally,
kind of yelling out on those. And a couple in my career, I remember. So one was a long time ago in the oil and gas space. There was an organization that RFPs were out and ended up being selected because of the company's reputation. A number of companies had gone through regulatory issues, but the way that we dealt with our issues in the transparent, open fashion was great. Another one was partnering with the regulator. So if you have something bad happens with you, partnering with the enforcement agencies to bring that message and experience and how you did it to the public fora. And another example, I had a colleague that identified a significant contractual issue that favored the supplier, raised it to the compliance team. Yes, we need to notify the supplier. It was a very significant dollar amount. And the supplier said, in 30 years they've been doing this, no one's ever raised this issue. No one's come forward with that. And they waived the financial impact to the company.
Wow.
So when you have those wins, those are fantastic around, and again, you can then do a story on integrity or ethics pays, because it literally pays in that circumstance, right? And that doesn't happen at all the times that are around too. And a lot of times you hear like the concept of the ethics premium, which I think is very valuable. Oftentimes I think that's a proxy for good governance, because I still think in the profession, causation versus correlation, and that is really, really hard to nail down and say, if you're this, then that. But yeah, there's really.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah. Can we talk about that? You're saying the ethics premium, if there was a strong force, obviously there's 1,000 contributing variables and factors for that premium, but you would say that the strong force is governance.
Yeah, and so integrity and ethics can be wrapped into that. But so I think it's just hard to say, is the causation of the stronger performance the ethics program, right? Or the integrity program or the compliance program? It can be a component of that, but oftentimes a little bit aside, a little bit different from ethics and integrity, you have really good governance around things across the organization, of which integrity can be a piece, but it may not be the screaming or the biggest piece of the puzzle. And so I think it's just very hard to say, just because you have this, then that. I mean, certainly there's some correlation to that. I mean, there's all kinds of, happier employees reporting things earlier and all that. But I just think as a profession, we need more research around the correlation causation aspect to really hammer home and say this is, because I think if you prove to the business causally that this is, then they're going to be, yeah, let's do it, right? I mean, I think there's still a little bit of, doubt maybe, and okay, this
Yeah.
is the compliance organization trying to sell itself. So you got to be able to look them straight in the face and say, yeah, the rigorous scientific research has been done, and here's how this occurred.
Interesting. I think I have some thoughts on that. I mean, I think I agree at some level. I feel like we overcompensate for that question mark around correlation and causation to too far of a degree. And I'm just saying that other departments who are fighting for power within our organizations, they don't get as hung up on the differentiation between correlation and causation. An example I always use is like the marketing department for anything, okay? Or the marketing department for the Super Bowl ad that costs $6 million. There's a bunch of things that are probably correlation driven that they are calling causation driven in order to justify the investment. Is that low integrity in your mind? And like, what do you think about what I just said? Like, what do you think about that, like, bias for certainty, or that bias for clarity, or the bias, I'd say an oversampled bias for not getting out over our skis and not making claims that aren't sort of 100% falsifiable. I feel like that prevents us from having the courage or the confidence to like engage in more persuasion around some of these second and third order impacts that maybe arguably are correlation issues, not causation issues.
Yeah, no, I think it's very true. I mean, I think, one of the things for credibility, again, I think the compliance function always has a credibility issue because they say no. Marketing doesn't usually say no to something,
good point.
right?
That's
so
a really good point.
I think we're always saying no, no, no. So you have that black mark or the devil on your shoulder, and the angel's a little small. So I think it's overcoming some of that. I do think and again, I think lots of compliance officers will raise that. They just won't say, I'm going to die on that hill if somebody questions that. And I had a leader 15 years ago. We were talking about the third-party due diligence program. And of course, as always, every couple of years, oh my God, you got to up the game and do all this kind of stuff. And one of the most supportive executives I've ever seen asked me, if we invest $1 million in this program to boost it to sort of be best in class, do we get the return on investment? And wasn't questioning ethics or integrity, was a huge supporter of what we did, but it was a fair question to ask. And I couldn't answer. I don't think you get dollar for dollar necessarily, right? So, a lot of other functions have to put forward sort of that business case, and it goes through the gauntlet. And sometimes compliance just goes because we have to, or because it's the right thing to do, right? So I think
compelling, right?
That can't undermine that. So I agree. I think if you can find a balance between, there's a lot of arguments out here acknowledging that, like many other functions, everything's not perfect and you don't get pure, causation. But look, there's a lot of positive indicators here that this is, and if it is truly a value and not an initiative that goes away, then I think you invest in values because it's who you are. That's right.
Yeah. Because that's just the way that we do business, and we think that that's going to sort of, even out in the end or something like that.
Yeah.
I'd love to go back. So you went in. I'd love to go back. You went in-house, and you were focused on. You've kind of made this distinction between hard and soft compliance, and so it sounds like you were kind of first squarely in that hard, realm underneath that compliance umbrella, and over time, it seems like you're now over both the hard and the soft. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that transition and what revelations you had as you incorporated some of these less sort of objective, clear, aspects of this ethics integrity game?
Yeah, and I think it's it's just a it's just a recognition of reality of human behavior. Another maybe a little example would be everybody when they do their training at the end of the year, they have certifications. Like I've read the code of conduct and every policy, and I changed that years ago, and we had lots of debates and discussions around it. But I went to, you familiarize yourself with this because no one reads the policies and
I know.
I mean, I would even venture to say the legal department and the compliance department, everybody in those departments has not read them cradle to grave. So you don't want them to be ethics, integrity, legal, compliance experts. You want them to know what are the basics to issue spot, when to go to somebody, who to go to, how to go to that party to get the answer, et cetera. And then you want, if you have that strong ethical culture, you're also pushing down things that they know they don't need to go. So they're not over rotating and over going to the, can I take a pencil home, or is that considered to be theft? I mean, you could get that crazy environment as well. So I think when you start to add the softer things in, and it's more like recognizing reality. And there was just a really good Harvard Business Review article the other day that was about sales gamesmanship. And it was really interesting about here's all the things and what might you allow and what might not you allow. But what really reflected to me was if you don't jump in and understand, this is the roll up the sleeves and understand what your teams and your businesses are facing, how are you really going to be effective if you don't understand the pressures?
Yeah.
And I also had a general counsel years ago that had an external presentation that he brought into the legal and compliance team. And it was from another general counsel who for 6 months on an interim basis was a business unit president. And
Cool.
So the perspective that gave, that individual said the pressures you're facing, you don't want to do bad stuff, but they're coming at you so empathizing and putting yourself in that person's shoes. That's sort of where, as I got the experience and saw what they were going through, how can I make, how do you deburden people from compliance initiatives and things? And how do you reduce the friction between your team and the business? I mean, those are two really, really important
Big
things.
ones.
And how do you make it second nature where it's not robotic? I have to go through these 17 steps to have a $2.50 cup of coffee with somebody, who may be, an airline official or something like that. Not the senior bigwig, but a little person. So, and I think that is one of the things when you see the hysteria around all the FCPA things at the moment. It's an opportunity to recalibrate, because I do think some of the extremes have been there many, many times, and the amount of times compliance programs spend on the cup of coffee analysis versus different things can be really significant. And so the opportunity to sort of recalibrate, maybe the message isn't artful and perhaps it's extreme and crazy, but at the bottom line, that's where I think keep calm. What can we take away from this? And it's like, let's think about how we recalibrate the enforcement of the law. It's not going to go away, but let's think about, and then what does that mean for internal programs? So we could perhaps put our resources to more high risk areas and functions and concerns.
Yeah, there is a lot of opportunity in this for sure. And if nothing else, I think it's an opportunity to show that we're common sense and that we're responding to what's going on in the, broader society.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It seems like our industry in general, which is really just the sum total of all the practitioners' viewpoints and, experiences. It seems like the industry was first focused on the hard stuff. And then we've at some point had this epiphany where it's shifted to saying, it's all about human behavior. And we got to fix the human behavior. If we can fix the integrity, then the compliance kind of takes care of itself. That's just a high level kind of industry wide, thing that I think has happened. It seems like for you though, it seems like you probably had that epiphany pretty soon. And I would bet that you had that human behavior thing even when you were squarely focused on the hard compliance stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, that to me, being sort of what I hopefully consider to be a well-rounded advisor, taking a step back, looking at the big picture, seeing the forest through the trees, all those kinds of things, I think it's really important to take that view or vantage point, because it absolutely is. How do you do this? It's you add in multinational corporations, many languages, different cultures.
Yeah.
Even things like outside, what if your corporate culture is contrary to the local culture, right? A variety of different things. So you have you want somebody to behave one way behind the gate, and then they go home and they behave a different way, right? Potentially.
Right.
So it's really, and society there's turmoil in society and all these things are going on. So for me, it was trying early on to really think about how do you get people to do things differently, and where it's not robotic and it's not, coming down hard on people. And there's concepts of nudges. There have been pros and cons over the last couple of years, but things like that of thinking about ways to try to get people to act in the best way. And I do think, in my mind, our programs are it's like a three-legged stool: people, process, systems. And oftentimes now with AI, there's this huge rush where we can AI everything and we can automate everything. And so you take away the people, you reduce the people. And when you have a three-legged stool and you kind of cut a leg, I mean, and I've seen that many, many times. To me, the technology amplifies or augments the team. It allows the team to do things that they just haven't had the time or the capacity to do. And there might be a headcount or two saved, but it's not like you can have one compliance person sitting behind, Robbie the robot's terminal and doing everything there. And if you're not rubbing elbows, getting out into the field, see what people are really, it's kind of deferred preventative maintenance. And I used to have a colleague that would say that is like, look, many companies don't want to spend $10,000 on Monday on training, but on Friday, obviously you compress time frame, on Friday they pay $1 million fine or something, right? So, and it is, I mean, it's like, oh, we don't need to do this. And it is cyclical. You see, pros and cons, and memories are forgotten. So one of the key things is executives and boards that have had the experience of going through sort of a compliance or regulatory nightmare have a very different view than those that haven't. And when the organization forgets over time, because people come and go, that's why you see sometimes repeat offenders, or you never root out the real problematic culture at its core.
Yeah, that's right. Do you feel like the panic coming from these changes, coming from these executive orders is a little bit overblown?
Yeah. I mean, I call it hysteria. So, I think it's calm down, pause, take a step back. Let's see what it's really saying. Let's think through, what does this mean for us? Again, the VUCA, the volatility, the unpredictability, that's hard because the pendulum feels like it's doing this, versus like this a little bit.
Right.
But we're well suited to manage that. I mean, we have that whole circle of, the risk assessment, et cetera, and all that. And so I think, for example, on that, the messaging ought to be, a key message on day one, the U.S. government's not really saying we're not going to enforce and corruption's okay. Sometimes, again, the messaging from the government is confusing or inartful. And I think people could absolutely take that message in the field. But I think you've got to go out to your organization and say, either nothing's changing or we're doubling down. It does make it harder because one of the things I've always said is the World Economic Forum had a framework that they put out probably in 2011. It was called the Resist Framework. Really, really good, of how to help the business people resist bribe requests. And so one of the things you could say, for example, was, well, I don't want to get in trouble with my company's policy. Your government's enforcing things, or the U.S. government is. Now there's this bribery against the official, different, all these things, this mosaic where you can go, I want to preserve our relationship. I don't want to see you or me in trouble or ruin the relationship. I think that does get harder because I do think you're going to have some government officials say, your government doesn't care about this either, so let's just do it. So I think you have to really think through and equip your workforce with the tools to further resist those types of things. Well, that may be, your perception of this, that's not really what they're saying. That's not who we are as an organization. We're going to win fair and square. I mean, those different things I think are really, really important to convey to the workforce, and with clarity and with compassion too.
Yeah. And I think that's spot on. And to the extent you're a vendor, your customers or your potential customers have probably not deleted their third-party requirements because some executive order was written, was held up in some office somewhere. You know what I'm saying? So it's probably a lot more, staying the same than changing.
I think there's like 40 plus countries that have ABC rules.
Exactly.
You've got different agencies in the U.S. that enforce them, and they may line up behind the executive order at some point. But this administration's here for 4 years. The statute of limitations is 5. When you stretch it with conspiracy, you can get 9 or 10 years. So and then customers, banks, insurance companies.
Right.
So it's not going away, but it is hard when, one of the top dogs sort of indicates or hints or suggests or puts inartful phrases out there. And every administration has an enforcement focus. It's just done, I think, in a much more organized, clear, clean, crisp, traditional way than might be the case otherwise.
But to your point, again, like that dispassionate posture is absolutely what's needed, because we have to hold that line, right? Like when that executive makes that kind of comment, it's on us to make sure that that's framed out right. He might not be thinking about the 40 other countries that have ABC rules. He might not be thinking about our presence in those countries. He might not be thinking about the third-party risk management process that every potential sale ends up having to go through. when he makes that offhand comment because he was reading, Twitter in the morning. You know what I'm saying? So it's on us to make sure that like people are thinking about things in the right way, both toward the positive and the negative.
And I think it may be where I would really see it is what's acceptable gift travel entertainment stuff. That's probably where the rubber meets the road. And practically speaking, where is this going to, we want to be able to do all these other things because the Chinese are doing this, or the Russians, or whoever it may be, the Brazilians, whatever it may be. But so I think that's where the most of the focus, practically speaking, because I don't think anybody's going to come and say, yeah, give somebody a bag of cash perfectly okay. Now, maybe government officials may. But companies probably not, and like I said, you also have the SEC rules still. So what is the SEC enforcement? Does it line up with DOJ in some way, shape, or form? So books and records and things, a lot easier to catch people on that than a hardcore bribe that the DOJ would pursue for sure.
As we're getting to the end here, I wanted to spend a little time talking about this coaching program that you're going through. And I love your drive behind doing it. You're like, I want to be a better leader. So much of leadership is not just motivation, but it's pouring into our folks and helping them get unstuck. I was watching a video last night where this guy was talking about laziness, and he was saying, that person's not lazy. They're just lost. We're all wired to be productive. We're all wired to have goals and have that sort of, preservation of life and perpetuation of our species, right? Like that is a sort of, that's a combustion that in theory is going on all the time. And so the theory in this video was that like when you see someone exhibiting kind of opposite behavior, it's because there's something going on in them. They're depressed. They're without a direction. They don't know what that next step is. And I think we as leaders can sort of tune into our team if our eyes are open and we're intentional about it and help get folks unstuck. So I love that drive. And I'd love to hear a little bit about like what some of your biggest takeaways have been, or what some of the biggest like the tactics that you've learned or frameworks that you've learned that you've seen massive impact, maybe beyond what you thought.
Yeah, so early days for me, for sure. I think, one is certainly the power of people within themselves to make the change for themselves. So as a coach, if you can help people get to the solution on their own, where you're not giving them the answer, and some different views on what coaching is and isn't, but I think there's a real power in the individual arriving at his or her own, and also own conclusion or own action plan. It also drives buy-in and ownership and accountability, et cetera, for sure. But I think probably the biggest takeaway for me, we're not talking coaching for deficiencies or career derailments. Think about coaching. What do we do? The average age I think someone gets a coach is like 42. It's not too late, but it is really, really late in your career sometimes at 42 to be getting your first coach. And so this concept of not really it's kind of like a life coach, because issues can be personal. And, people talk about work-life balance. I always think it's more like work-life integration now. So the two blend and merge all the time. I got to leave the office to pick up children, or I got to do this or do that, or I got an elderly relative I have to care for. I've had a health issue and I want to run when the sun is out. I mean, all these different things that pop up. And so I think it's a different type of coaching where you're not coaching a problem necessarily. I mean, the person could raise a problem, but it's, maybe the person was, how do I get better at influencing or persuading? This is really something I want to do. So it's driven by the coachee. And it's not driven by the organization. So there's a tremendous amount of trust between the coach and the coachee, and you're there for the person, the whole person. And so it really is sort of a different model than the traditional one is, okay, Johnny, you got a 2 out of 5 this year, or you're being a jerk as a leader. And again, there's a role for that as well. That coaching will not go away. Some folks would call that things different than coaching, consulting, or something like that. But really, I think seeing the power of the individual come to his or her own conclusion is really, really, something that you can just see the light bulb and the smile on the face and the sort of the sense of self-accomplishment. I think that's something that just as a coach, it's like the aha moment when that goes off. It's really a powerful thing. And I think if organizations could begin to coach people before there are problems, I also think it's a great way of sort of maybe indoctrinating culture early on.
Yeah, totally.
People that come in, it's a little bit like the military. If you think that, when everybody was in the military, there was a shared common experience. And I think that's something in the US that we've lost as a society. everybody's doing their own thing different ways. There's no more sort of, at least, when the draft was around, et cetera, people had to go through a couple of years, and it was just a shared, it's that, again, roll up.
Well, think of that whole generation had that experience, to your point. And there's so many values that were shared across a massive swath of people. I mean, that had a huge impact on the direction that society went, to your point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what does that take? Does that just take engaging at a deeper level, or does that take looking at their performance from a different perspective? Like, how do you start to move from that, what you called kind of the consulting, the sort of task-based 2 to 5 type of thing, to the, hey, the answer's in you and I'm going to help you kind of reveal it?
Yeah, so I think it's you have to get sort of the big wigs in the organization on board with the concept. Again, I think one angle that's not talked about often is how do you push or promote culture? If you could now, and it's not an inexpensive thing. So unless you're bringing the coaches in-house, it could be a really high cost. But again, cost benefit analysis over time, depending on how large your organization is. And you might also pick, it's like the informal influencers in an organization. Where's the followership really at? And if you could identify those people that are the movers and the shakers, or that have the influence in the organization, formal or otherwise, and coach them, that might have the cascading or amplifying effect of pushing the culture out through the organization. So I think you've got to get top-down buy-in of just a different approach. And where I've seen this a lot is the Bay Area. More innovative companies out there, more tech-led companies, and the old iron ore factory type is not as fast to adopt that model. But I think over time you might see some of that. But it's sort of in the experimental phase to do it at large scale versus individual. And I think large scale could really have some impact. That is, again, causation, correlation, all those kinds of things. Proving the business case is hard when you don't have, here's a swath of data from 10 years to do this. It's sort of gut instinct on that.
Right. Well, Scott, this was a lot of fun. You're a phenomenal guest. Where can people find you if they want to learn some more about you?
So LinkedIn for now. So I took a couple of months off before I dive into my next compliance opportunity. So I'm going to be figuring out what's next on the adventure front, and would love to chat with folks at all. And again, LinkedIn, probably the easiest place to get me.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. If I can help in any way, please reach out anytime. Really, really great. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next time.
All right, Nick. Thanks.